Welcome to Planet Noun, where it's all about the people, places, things, and ideas that teach us, prompt us to make a difference, and do more with what life presents. Sometimes romantic relationships suck, especially when they run off the rails, whether it be from growing differences between relatants. Relatants, is that even a word? I have no idea. I'm going to look it up. If it's not a word, then it's a new one today. Look, do people run off the rails because of growing differences? Or what if someone just ups and decides, oh, they don't want you, they don't want you, they don't want you, they don't want you no more, but they don't bother to tell you about it? Basically, when someone ghosts you, yeah, that's when romantic relationships can get on the sucky side. Today's guest experienced ghosting. She was the ghostee, if you will. Old boy turned her loose, but didn't verbally communicate that to her. So Lenina Mortimer wrote a book about it to help someone else along this ghoulish breakup recovery path. Let's get right to it with relationship coach Lenina Mortimer, author of the book, I Ain't Thinking About You, the 8-step guide to finally letting him go using the breakup funeral method. Let's get this mourning in motion on Planet Noun.
So this all started after I'd gotten ghosted. So seeing a guy, and then he disappeared. And I was left with feelings of unworthiness, rejection, shame, abandonment, and I really needed a way to process it. And I needed to find closure. And I created the Breakup funeral as a result of that.
Okay. And so just to get in your business a little bit, how long had you been seeing the guy? And like, sometimes I ask myself this after a breakup, why does this hurt so much?
So we were friends first and then lovers next. And I will say that it hurt because there was something for me to resolve in there. And I get into it in my book about the lessons that came about from the ghosting. Namely, there were 3. Well, one, I realized I had this belief. I didn't believe that I was deserving to be loved consistently. So
that was a story that you told about a family member and how that connected to that feeling that you had that you weren't worthy to be loved.
Yes. So I got to the place where I was like, okay, there are lessons here. What are they? And I figured them out. And then I was still ruminating over the breakup, and I just couldn't figure out why. And so then I had this come to Jesus moment, and I was sitting on my bed, and I was just like, listen, Spirit, tell me what I need to know. Show me what I need to see so I can move past this. And I went to bed and woke up in the morning and had this insight. And Freud has this theory that you date your mom, you date your dad, Oedipal complex stuff, right? And so whenever I had heard it in the past, I'd be like, oh, okay, listen, I don't have any daddy issues, but I don't know why my relationships are so dysfunctional. And so when I say dysfunctional, I mean like they'd be like really passionate and loving for a brief period of time, and then they would end abruptly. So that's what I mean by dysfunction. And so I was just like, I don't get it. I don't know why they're so messed up. And I woke up that morning and I had this insight. Growing up, I had 2 father figures, my dad and my uncle. And when I was 4, my uncle was the love of my life. That was bae. We cooked together. We go to church together. We do everything together. And then one day he disappears. and I internalized that and made it about me not being good enough. And when I got a little bit older, I don't want to leave your audience in suspense. My uncle's fine. He got ill and went back to our home in Haiti. And I was young enough. I was young, so nobody thought to be like, oh, we need to tell Lenina what happened to her uncle. And I got to this place where I was just like, oh, I'm not dating my dad. I'm dating my uncle. I don't have daddy issues. I have daddy uncle issues.
Wow.
And that's when it fell into place for me.
Wow. Well, so how long did it take for you to realize, okay, there's something that I need to work through? And then you got to that point where you said, this is the issue, the daddy uncle issue.
How long did it take for me to get to that point? Well, dude ghosted in November, and by Christmas time, I had gotten to that realization.
So you were doing some serious work from the time you got ghosted.
Yes, girl. I was doing the work.
So wasn't letting it marinate and sit for like years.
Right, right. And you know what? It's interesting that you would mention that is when I started talking about my process and how I process this breakup and I shared with friends and colleagues, they'd say to me like, wow, something like that happened to me years ago and it took me about 5 years to get over it.
Ooh, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's what I want to put an end to because I find that it's such a waste of time and where you can be directing that energy towards your passion towards creating impact in the life of your life and that of the world, you're stuck ruminating over this like dead end relationship.
Wow. So now let's get to the time you conducted your first breakup funeral. So guy ghosted in November.
Yeah.
You came to your epiphany you said by December
Yeah.
of that same year.
Yeah.
And how long before you hosted your first breakup funeral?
My first breakup funeral was a memorable date, March 3rd at 3 p.m. So
Wow.
3
Also
days
the following year, that next
yeah,
calendar
like
year?
that the next calendar year. It was yeah, it was just like, okay, it's time. I'll do it. And the funny thing is how like I got to creating the breakup funeral. Once I had that aha moment, the realization that okay, this is daddy uncle issues, I was like in my divine feminine anger. I don't know how else to explain it.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean and how it feels. Don't get in the way of that.
I was enraged, and quite frankly, my trainer, a man, got the brunt of it because he was the only one close enough to me to like be incinerated by the fire. He's a good man. He's a good man.
Singed edges, but he'll be all right.
Yeah, he's got no eyebrows left. He's got no edges.
Gift him some edge growth for Christmas.
I'll gift him a do-rag for next time I'm in my feminine rage. I'll be like, yo, my bad. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I need to get something to fan with. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay.
So I was in my feminine rage and I needed a way to like process what was going on. And so I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna start exploring. And I got my natal chart read for the first time. I got I got a reading by a friend who's a psychic medium and she reads Akashic records. And she read my record and before I even opened my mouth, she was just like, listen, Spirit said, you know you're in trouble when she starts like, listen, Spirit said you need to do something about the ghosts of past lovers on you.
Wow. And you're
Yeah.
thinking what? All I did was sit down.
Exactly. I was like, I didn't say nothing, girl. That's how I test out my psychics. I'm like, let's see if you know anything. I'm not gonna say nothing. I'll let Spirit talk to you. Let's see what comes up. And then she started telling me, like, oh yeah, you got like the ghosts of past lovers around you. I'm like, girl, you know I got ghosted, right? And she's like, oh, really?
Wow.
And so she's like, okay, you've got to memorialize them in some way. And she's like, you can make it a private funeral. You can write their names down, put it on a mantle, an altar. And then she stops the reading and she's like, listen, this all sounds very ridiculous to me. And I was just like, what? Ridiculous to you? You're the psychic. Like, come on.
I'm sorry, I need a minute.
No, don't apologize. It's that is, yes. I'm glad you're laughing because
I'm just thinking my reaction would be, what?
exactly. So we get to she's like, okay, listen, this is bizarre. And I'm like, okay, listen, I don't know about you, but I'm taking notes. I'm like, listen, my spirit guides, they know me, baby. I'm just like, this is not gonna be nothing private. I'm gonna invite my girlfriends. We're gonna have some sparkling champagne. I got a fire pit out back. We're gonna burn some stuff. And that's how we gonna do this funeral. And that's how the first breakup funeral was born.
And what made it so therapeutic? Because in the book you talk about the importance or the significance of the incineration or
Mm.
the of burning as you memorialize those past relationships.
So here's what makes it so therapeutic. In when one is treating trauma, it's parts of the brain that handles language and voicing what's wrong gets shut down. And the beauty of performing ceremonies and rituals is that it bypasses the language. You don't need to speak it. You can act it out and process it. And this is a way to act out an ending to get closure. And so that is why the cremation or the breakup funeral is so therapeutic.
And how did you feel like right after? Did it take a while for you to feel, yes, I am that feeling, yes, I am free? Or was it immediate, or did it come a week later? Or what was that like for you?
Okay, so really interestingly, I did it and I was just like, okay, I feel fine. And up until that point, I was just like, okay, I'm moving. The thing about grief, it doesn't, sometimes you're doing okay. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, like maybe like majority of the time you're doing okay. And occasionally something will come up and you're like, oh, okay, I'm not okay. That reaction surprised me. And funny thing is that I blocked the ghost on all social media. So I didn't know anything that was going on with him. And like one day my sister happened to come by and she's like, girl, did you hear? He just bought a house. And I don't know what I was doing. I might have been cleaning some dishes, but I was just like, don't you ever tell me anything good about, like, I blacked out. Don't ever tell me any good news about him. I'm like, listen, if his house burns down, if the three little wolves come by and huff and puff and blow his house down, that is when you tell me. Until then, don't share anything else. And she looked at me. I had incinerated her. No brows left.
I don't want the huff. I don't want the puff. I want the blew the house down.
Blew it down brick by brick. I'm just like, listen. And like, yes, she got incinerated and she like did a crab walk out of the room and she's like, okay, it'll never happen again.
Oh, and this was after the funeral?
This was after the funeral.
But the process had already been started toward healing. So just because you have your breakup funeral doesn't necessarily mean you won't circle back to some of those feelings. I love the word incineration. I can
Well said.
Everything.
Yes, well said. Just because you've had the ceremony and you've addressed the underlying issues and you now see the beliefs that got you where you are, got you the results you have today, does not mean that it disappears. There's some residuals. There's some residual effect, and that's the part that takes time. And I was also fortunate enough that I was in grad school at the time and studying clinical psychology with a focus on mind, body, spirit. And all my professors were therapists. So I would work out my stuff in class.
Why not?
Yeah, they don't mind. They're like, oh, you want to volunteer for this? Great. And that is the basis on, in fact, that's how I developed the breakup funeral method. I was working on my master's thesis at Columbia, and I took a deep interest in spiritual healing ceremonies and the efficacy of spiritual healing ceremonies. I wanted to know if they were effective and its effects. Today, when I study spiritual healing and spiritual healing ceremonies, it will be with the approach of, I know they're effective. I know they work. Now I want to know how they work.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because that's a question I have too. Because I don't know. Yeah, I know you mentioned you went to church with your uncle. I grew up going to church as well, and sometimes I wonder, okay, I know this is the stuff that I've been fed, but like, what's the science behind it? How does it work? So that's interesting. I want to like to keep track of that as you as you work that out and write that next book. Listen to me.
I got another book in me. I feel it.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's talk about timing. We kind of touched on this just a little bit before. When is it best to have the breakup funeral? I know in some literal funeral traditions, it's customary to get the body in the ground to, before sundown or before the day is over. And in some other traditions, you have to gather the folks from around the country and it might take a week or two. What does timing look like? Does it matter? Should the person have this funeral as soon as possible, or should they kind of, putter around a little bit, or does it's just different for each person?
Okay, so I will say the typical answer of someone who in psychology, which would be it depends. It depends on the severity of the hurt. It depends on where you are in your process. Sometimes having to plan a funeral may be overwhelming, might be too much at the time. And so with that understanding, I would recommend you give it some time. You get some distance, and if you are still thinking about him after, say, 4 to 6 weeks, and I would be like, okay, this is time for me to find closure. If you wake up and say, I need closure, or wake up and say, I need to talk to him to find closure, do the funeral right away.
Okay, and then that'll continue that process.
Yeah.
And then going back again to what you said, it's a process. And I drag that word out because, it's not one and done.
Mm-hmm.
Is there such thing as going too fast? Because cognitively, it's over. The person isn't coming back. You don't even want them to come back, but your heart hasn't quite caught up with that thought that you know what, I know the person is coming back. I don't want him. I don't want that fool no more. I don't want him anymore. But the heart is still.
Interestingly enough, intellectually, I didn't want him because I'm like, no, what? You treated me badly. But there was a point where there was a window where if he had called, I would have been like, great, I'm glad you're back. Welcome back. And that is the, I guess, radioactive period. I don't know how else to explain it.
Nice word.
You're radioactive and you're still very deeply bonded to this person. The brain on love has a cocktail of hormones swimming through it, and you are actually bonded and attached to this person. And while your brain is like, no, intellectually, no, I know he's not good for me, but your lizard brain is like, no, I still have this attachment, this addiction to this person, and they're the only ones that'll make it better. So wow. I'm gonna need another hit of that. And wow. So that is the I guess that's the one of the obstacles to moving past a breakup. If you keep getting like re-upped and keep getting a hit of dopamine every time he like rings you and says, hey, I've been thinking about you. That's like, oh, okay, so there might be a chance for us. And it's just like restarts the breakup process all over again. And it's just a freaking roller coaster. And so this is why I recommend like blocking him from everything. If you truly and really believe like, listen, I need to move past this. This is not good for me. You got to do the blocking.
So I'm going to take a quick pause right here to say, when I was younger, my mom had some breakup advice for me. She essentially told me when I had a bad breakup to just block them for a bit and get used to having them, or rather not having them, in my life so much. But it wasn't in the vein of ghosting, though. She wasn't talking about that. More about it and more with relationship coach and author Lenina Mortimer on Planet Noun. I remember I had a breakup and I was sad, moping, Eeyore-ish, just to bring that character from Winnie the Pooh. And, she told me, look, I understand, your feelings are hurt, but you being friends right away, that's not the best thing. You need a period of separation. I think those are her exact words. This is before social media. So, but she said, yeah, period of separation. So I did the 90s equivalent of blocking. Now, you talk about the communal experience. When you have a breakup funeral, you don't necessarily light candles by yourself.
Mhm.
You're not alone. You bring people along with you, and it's a communal experience, kind of like funerals are a communal experience. And why is that a key portion of the breakup funeral?
Well, for one, I find that the healing and learning is expedited in groups because the insight that one person has and then shares, the light bulb goes off on someone else, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I see how like that insight, like your insight has really served me to like realize like, oh, that's what's coming up for me." And so that's one of the reasons why I really stress the communal aspect of the breakup funeral. Also, there's an element of it's a celebration, and in celebration, we get to be recognized. And a portion of the funeral is saying, "Hey, this is what's coming up for me. This, hey guys, this is something exciting that's coming down the pike. I am completing my dissertation. This is what's coming for me, and I recommend that other folks be like, wow, that's really great news. Thank you for sharing that." And it also gives people something to check in on you on outside of your breakup. Well,
Awesome,
yeah,
awesome.
you said that you were graduating in a few weeks. Checking in on that. How'd that go? And
Oh.
also generally telling people that you're in mourning so that they can check in on you too. We don't have to do this alone.
Mm. Repeat that again.
We don't have to do this alone.
There's help with the people around you who love you. Now, with the funeral, just like a person who is actually passed on, there's prep work. So you don't just jump into the funeral and say, "Hey, okay, I'm gonna have this funeral, write this letter to this person, and we're gonna burn it."
Mm-hmm.
There's some you have to do some work.
Yeah.
You have to do some work. Okay.
Yeah.
So and part of that unpacking involves, tracing patterns, but then there are other steps as well.
One of the things that I really enjoy about the breakup funeral is celebrating our strengths. And so a lot of the work that I do is rooted in positive psychology. And positive psychology is the study of flourishing. Um, it's the study of character strengths. And there are 24 character strengths. And just to give folks an idea, we have top character strengths like creativity, humor, honesty, kindness, hope. Those are all character strengths. And as part of the pre-funeral work, I have my clients take the VIA character strength survey, which it's a little, quick 15-minute test you take online, and that tells you what your top character strengths are. I find that there's a focus on, well, when there's a weakness, we've got to strengthen it. Strengthen it. But the beauty of knowing your character strengths is that you recognize them and you build those muscles. And so the idea with positive psychology is that you know your character strengths and then you build upon them so that when something does happen, something traumatic or something challenging, you have your character strengths that have been developed to rely on.
In the book, you also talk about self-care. So
Mm-hmm.
you have different steps, and I think I mentioned in a review that the book is a workshop, and I love that about it. It's a workshop. It's a workshop in under 100 pages. So don't let the length fool you. This book is packed.
I'm so glad you said that. So I had someone review and say, "Oh, I read the title and I was expecting something sassy and a quick read." and then they're like, and then I started to dive in. I was just like, "Oh," and they were actually surprised. And I like that. I do want it to be quick, sassy read, but also I want to leave the reader better than how they were before, or smarter, or more informed. And that was my intention with the book. Also, it is a workshop. So it's funny that you would say that it's a workshop. It started off as a 90-minute workshop, that I do once a quarter at a breakup retreat that a friend of mine runs. It's called We Are Self-Centered. And so I'm their resident dating coach, or breakup coach rather, and I lead women through funerals. So that is how I really like streamlined the process, and I got to see what worked and what didn't. So it's like one thing to write a thesis and have all these theories, and it's another to see your theories actually played out in real life and to see what works, what landed, where was like where did I feel the energy shift in the room, and what process. And that is what I bring into the book. I'm just like, okay, I know for sure this works. Also, I knew for sure that it worked when I bumped into the ghost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Describe that. Because,
Yeah.
that's, well, whatever happened to the guy? The world is a small place. What happened?
So I had an intuitive knowing that one day I would bump into him, off the strength that we have friends in common. It was kind of like, obviously, first of all, don't ghost people that you have friends in common with. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Either way, really randomly, I stepped off the train one day and bumped into him on the platform. And I was just like, well, looky here. Well, in my head. In fact, I probably didn't even say any of that. But I was like, I stared at him because I almost didn't recognize him. It felt like bumping into like a B-list celebrity. Like, yo, I know you from somewhere, but I can't tell from what. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Like they face look familiar. So you might be like Facebook friends with them. You might have seen their face with a friend of a friend, or you've seen them in something.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
No. So I'm like, I looked at him, I squinted a little, like, and I'm like, okay, if this person doesn't recognize me, I'm gonna stop because it's weird. Like, I can't be staring at him. And so then he looked at me with recognition in his eyes, and I was just like, oh, that's him. Anyway, and so we embraced, and he was like, oh, how are you? How are you doing? And he's like rambling he just saying everything off the top of his head. And I was just like, oh, you shook. Okay. I'm like, what? And obviously, whenever I tell the story, I'm like, yo, when I'm telling my girlfriend, I'm like, listen, he was shooketh. Okay. He was really shook when he saw me. And so, and so like, I get to this place where I was just like, oh man, the needle didn't even move. I found this beautiful neutral. I didn't care. And I had rehearsed in my head what it is I would have said to him many times before when I was deep in my radioactive rage.
Incineration mode.
Incineration mode. I was like, yo, I know exactly what I'm gonna say. That's Brooklynese for me. I'm blacking out, and I'm gonna point a finger at his nose and say, right? All that. Because obviously I would not have remembered what exactly I would have said to him. But I didn't do any of that. I was just like, oh, okay, well, it's nice to see you. Take care. And I just walked away. And that was that moment. I was just like, okay, this is the universe telling me, like, this is time to share this process. It works. You know it works. You've tested it on actual people. You've seen the results. You've seen it play out in your life. And you're complete here. And to add to this completion, I find that I'm not complete until I've shared what I've learned. And so that is how I got to the book.
Oh, you're not complete until you've shared what you've learned.
Yeah. And now this isn't the case for many people. However, I know that my work here is to be a teacher of sorts. And so a book was one way to share what I've learned.
Wow. And so you talk about self-care, and the book, it's dense with workshop material, exercises, and self-care. I mean, that's a buzzword that you hear a lot, especially nowadays. What does self-care have to do with the book? the mission of the book, the purpose of the book, and your desire to lead women dealing, or is it women or just anyone dealing with the breakup through the healing process?
So really interesting. When I was preparing when I did the pre-writing for my book, because there's pre-funeral work and also this pre-book writing work, one of the exercises I had to do was like, who am I writing this book to? This book I wrote as a love letter to Black women, to Latoya, who's, it's a loose version of myself at 31. And so I was writing a love letter to Latoya's. And a really major part of that for me was like, okay, well, talking about healing after breakups, specifically women healing after breakups, and even more specifically, Black women healing after breakups. And that was really important for me to focus on that. And a healing space for a Black woman is going to look different.
It seems that in the Black community as a whole, even though the Black community is diverse as anything, but one thread I notice, whether a person is, say from the States, from the Caribbean, from the UK, we're expected to hold things down.
Yes.
And to hold things in.
Yes.
And I don't know if I'm 100% right about that, but it seems that the different Black women I meet from different parts of the globe, that seems to be a thread that I pick up intuitively. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm open to being very wrong, but that seems to be a thread that I pick up. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you get the same thing.
I get the same thing. In fact, you're reminding me of a story I heard that something that Jesse Jackson once said. He said that that Black people are being described as like the lowest rung, and he's like, he says that we're, yes, perhaps the lowest rung, but we can reframe that and say we're the foundation of this country. And at the foundation, once your foundation is strong, everything up above it gets strong too, gets strengthened as well. And so if we're going to be straight up and say, well, okay, who's the lowest rung? And we look at those who are the sickest, who are the least paid, who are the most disenfranchised, and we see Black women there. And so the healing work is going to look different. And so this was my dedication to doing my part, or doing a piece of that healing work. And when Black women are healed, everyone gets healed. And it's like when Black women are doing well, everyone is doing better. And so I would think it'd be in everybody's interest to be like, yeah, you ladies take care of yourself and do your healing work, because I know that we will benefit from it.
So we talk about self-care. Another thing you also talk about is, we talk about acceptance, but you talk about radical acceptance. Radical acceptance. What is that?
So that piece of information really served me in realizing that one of the things I do, my default, is to look at myself and say, well, what did I do wrong? If this person's reacting this way, then I must have done something wrong. And that is, I've been conditioned and socialized to think that I did something wrong.
Now we're the defect. We're always the defect.
Right. We're always the defect. And so now when you're walking into a relationship with the thought that I'm the defect, I did something wrong, then we're forever looking at then abuse is no longer abuse. It's more like it's warranted, right? And so then we're taking on more of the responsibility, more of the burden, more of the blame in the relationship. And so then we're like, this clouds our judgment. And then we don't get to truly see the person for who they are and what they're doing when we're so clouded by our own defect. And so if your default is to be like, okay, well, what did I do wrong? Then this information is for you. Now, there are folks running around here who are just like, oh, I can never do anything wrong. So then this is not for you. Take a closer look at yourself.
Okay, you have a different set of issues.
Okay. this bit of information is not for you. It's for the people who are just like, okay, I must have done something wrong in order to deserve this. To really question yourself and question that thought, like, okay, where did this come from? Why am I thinking that? And it's not, am I being fair to myself? Because it's clear that this person isn't. Am I being fair to myself? I don't have to carry around this burden.
Yeah, because, self-care, when I hear self-care, I hear, the nails and, getting the hair done and getting a massage. And I think you bring it up in that particular, you encapsulate it that way as well, but it's more, it's some internal work.
Yeah.
It's that workshop.
The self-care is crucial. It's the absolute most crucial thing you can do when going through a breakup. And it's interesting to me that I was at a spa, and I was telling the woman sitting across from me, what is it I do? And she's like, you do what? And I'm like, yeah, I help women overcome breakups. She's like, that I'm going through a breakup. And something about the space we were in, I was just like, yeah, I know, like a lot of brokenhearted women come to spas. I'm just sorry. And self-care is paramount. And one of the processes I talk about in my book is, I was talking with a classmate / friend at a house party, and she's a sex coach. And I told her, I was like, listen, I'm going through a breakup. And she's like, okay, so what are you doing for your self-care? And I was just like, what do you mean self-care for a breakup? And she's like, listen, girl, you need to get on it. And I was just like, okay. And she's like, listen, there's this thing called titty massage. A breast massage, I call it. It's a breast massage, excuse me. And I'm just like, and what do we do with that? Why? And she's like, listen, just watch this YouTube video. You can do it yourself. And I was just like, oh, okay. The idea behind breast massages, besides the fact that it's cleansing and it helps to detox the body and release toxins from the lymph nodes in the breasts, it's also the idea that we're in control and we self-pleasure ourselves. Mm-hmm. That's an element to it as well. And also the touch releases feel-good hormones. Feel-good hormones. And so that is one of the reasons why I think heartbroken women go to spa. They go get massages, they go get touched. And I think I would recommend that. It helps. It takes the edge off. And I'll leave that there.
Okay.
Self-care.
Yeah, self-care, ladies. Self-care. Self-care. Now, you have 8 steps that lead up to the breakup funeral, and then, the celebration of yourself and, memorializing everything that you've been through or surrounding this breakup. Now, you have chapters after the breakup. And one of them is, I think it's called breakup traps. So going back to what you were saying earlier, this is a process. You may be in incineration mode, and then, you're out of incineration mode. You have your breakup funeral, and, elements of incineration may come back here and there, maybe, but the process has started. You've begun to process your way through the feelings toward the ultimate goal of healing. But you talk about some breakup traps that when I was reading, I'm thinking, okay, these breakup traps, this is something that can seriously hijack your progress. And one of them is, let's see, I remember this quote because I've heard this, I don't know how many countless times I've heard this. In order to get over him, you got to get up under someone else. And even hearing that as like a child and a teenager, I would always laugh because number one, the women who said it were just hilarious. Mm-hmm. They weren't trying to be funny, but they really were. Girl, you got to get up under somebody else. Hey. Mm-hmm. But that's not the best way to handle things.
Yes. I feel very strongly about that saying. And when I think it's a misguided piece of advice. Mm-hmm. And I realize that there might, the idea behind it is to, you know, move on and move on quickly. But
Because it seems like men do that. They get up under somebody else or over somebody else or whatever the case may be.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and look how happy they are. So,
Good point.
is it working? Does it work? It, the idea that it creates this social pressure to move on before you're ready, and it also, I don't want to say like it begs that that you what's the best way of saying it? Like that you need a man for it's just like you need a man not only to forget him
Mhm.
or to heal from him, like you need someone else. And the whole idea behind the breakup funeral is that you can create your own closure, your own healing. You have your own autonomy. You're in control of this. And so I really wish that we would retire that saying, even if it's just said in jest, but we're all hearing it. Little girls are hearing it, and it's not cool. Mm-mm.
And you are, as a journalist, the last question.
Mm.
Is there anything that I have not asked that you feel it's important to say? I knew you would get this one.
Yeah. So one of the things I wish for my readers is that they do not blame themselves and carry shame. And in one of the breakup traps, one of them is forgiving too soon. And forgiveness is one of those ideas that said, like, well, forgive fast, like do it, and it's always highly recommended. However,
Especially among church people.
yes, and I recommend that you do not, especially if you're not ready, because when you forgive too soon and you're not ready, you're still ruminating over it. Like, oh man, I'm like, I forgave him. Why am I still thinking about this? Why am I still thinking about him? Why am I still so angry? And then that only works to like re-trigger you and like restart the cycle all over again and like causing more shame. And so my recommendation is like, no, don't forgive. And forgiveness is not like it's not a prescription that you can just like hand out. It really just, it also depends on the severity of the hurt. And some women forgive too soon, specifically women, specifically battered women. Generally, women don't forgive. For anybody listening to this, if you're a man out there and you think that you're gonna do something and you're gonna slight a woman and she gonna forgive you real fast, no, she'll always remember and she won't forgive you. So don't do it. But there's this specific women who are abused forgive too soon, and the cycle of abuse continues on and on and on. And so specifically, I recommend that women who are in abusive relationship, like, no, don't entertain the idea. Forgiveness is not therapeutic. It isn't always therapeutic or always useful or necessary. And so I find that the biggest hurdle and biggest breakup trap is forgiveness. And so don't feel pressure to do it, to say that, I forgive you, just so you can, it only works to help them to feel better.
But you're still carrying all the baggage, the residuals from the hurt that they inflicted.
Yeah, but you're still messed up. So that would be my one piece of advice. Don't forgive. I mean, don't be spiteful and vindictive, but nah, we ain't forgiving. Team, no,
Team, no forgive. So, but you're not necessarily saying that you're against it. You're just saying don't just hand it out like free candy.
Yes, I'm not against it. I'm simply challenging the idea that forgiveness is one size fit all. I'm simply suggesting that we need to look at forgiveness a little closer, because who is it really for if the person isn't ready for forgiveness?
Ooh. Oh, So you're not ready to forgive, and they're not ready to be forgiven because they're still rotten.
Or like you're forgiving only because you feel as though it's the right thing to do, and you're feeling like, oh, I want to be a good person and make sure that they're feeling, I want to take care of their feelings. And so I'm going to say, I forgive you so that they can feel better. But meanwhile, you're not.
No self-care.
Yeah. And this calls for aggressive self-care. And so this is why I recommend, like, no, forgiveness, not yet. Just hold on. It'll come. It will come. Especially when you bump into them at a random moment where you're like, oh man, this is the same dude I couldn't even get on the phone to break up with. Oh, okay, cool. All right.
You're good.
Yeah, I'm good. Take care of yourself, man.
Thanks for listening to Planet Noun, where it's all about the people, places, things, and ideas that teach us, prompt us to make a difference, and do more with what life presents. That was Lenina Mortimer, relationship coach and author of the book, I Ain't Thinking About You, the 8-step guide to finally letting him go using the breakup funeral method. Learn more and get all of her social media handles and a link to her book at planetnoun.com. I'm Liz Anderson, host of the Planet Noun podcast. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're also on SoundCloud, and please stop by Apple Podcasts and rate the show. Thanks again for stopping by, and until next time, take care.